Well, welcome. This is our How to Tackle CMMC from an M&A perspective. I am Craig Kubicek, Vice President of Sales at Avatara. And first and foremost, just thank you so much for joining our conversation today. That's really what it's going to be about. This is going to be a little bit of a different conversation that I think is out there. I have lots of conversation with business owners. I've been a part of lots of different webinars or sat in on webinars that are talking about CMMC. And typically the conversation is all about how do I get compliant? What are the technical aspects of it? And to be quite frank, a lot of times it's the same story over and over again. And so today we're going to do something completely different. This is going to be not a technical conversation, or a practical, how do I get compliant? But what we want to do is talk about why business owners should be buttoning up their cybersecurity and their CMMC from a business perspective. The reality is CMMC can drive overall value of your business, and not just about getting compliant. It's about new business contracts. It's about keeping business. It's about, at the end of the day, getting a higher valuation of your company. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. It's going to be an interesting conversation from two guests that I'm really excited about. But the reason we're having this conversation, as I mentioned, I'm with a company called Avatara. We are a private data center technology company. We're based in St. Louis, Missouri. We have hundreds of customers all over the country, and we specifically do work with the DoD space. And so we've got a pretty unique IT technology platform that helps button up people's IT and technology and then get them compliant. And we work with companies that have up to 1,500 users. Our average customer size is right in the mid-business, about 63 users. And currently we work with 50 plus DoD companies all over the country. And frankly, 73% of our clients deal with some kind of compliance. And so we are, I would argue, pretty experts in the space, both from a technology side, but also from a CMMC compliance side. And so what we're going to do today, I've got two guests with us. I've got Rick Zimmerman, who is the former CEO of Chemco. I have personally had the privilege to know Rick for coming up on 10 years now, and he's been a longtime customer of Avatara. And then Trevor Bone, who is an investment banker with Cal Capital, who works exclusively in the DoD space doing M&A, and who helped Rick with his company. So with that, I want to specifically start by introducing Rick Zimmerman. Rick, if you could tell us a little bit about you, Chemco, and how you landed, frankly, on this webinar.
Okay, I'm the former CEO and partner in Chemco Aerospace. It's a mid-sized aerospace and defense manufacturer specialized in large bed, high precision milling of titanium and aluminum structural components for airplanes, helicopters, and missiles. We purchased the business in 2007, just as Avatara was getting started, and we sold the business in August of 2021 with Trevor's help. And so that's my background.
Excellent. And Trevor, same kind of question for you. Tell us a little bit about Cal Capital and frankly how you landed on this webinar, stuck with Rick and I.
Thanks, Craig. Yeah, no, excited to be here. Thanks for inviting me, and happy to share my thoughts over the next hour. So, Cal Capital is a investment banking business out in Southern California. We focus exclusively on aerospace and defense. We work with private companies. Those tend to be family-owned businesses, tend to be, partners. Sometimes they're multi-generational businesses. And our approach to them is to basically kind of be, full service around all things that kind of impact the valuation of the business. And so if those are things with respect to compliance, if it's access to capital, and if it's ultimately a liquidity event, those are all things that we help those business owners with. In the case of Chemco and a few other businesses in the area, we've had great success in helping them navigate through, ultimately what resulted in a full sale of the company. And through that process, interview many potential buyers. And part of my job, what makes me different than other investment bankers, is it's all about the preparation of getting ready to go to market and trying to do work beyond just the scope of, tax and estate planning and accounting. It's really expanded now into really critical areas that we found, including sort of CMMC compliance, which is a little bit of a moving target. It's really cumbersome and difficult for most private business owners to get their arms around it. And, happy to talk about our experience and what that means for marketing your company, or frankly, what it means if you're looking to scale and acquire other businesses, and how relevant it is to, winning new business from customers, and all the way through, engaging with dialogue on potential buyers for the company. So thanks for having me, and I look forward to sharing my perspective.
Excellent. And so for those that are just now joining us, we've got Rick and Trevor, and so we're just going to have a conversation about CMMC and what that looks like from a business owner's perspective of not just the technical, but more of the how do I fight for this for my company, and why is it so important? And so as we go through this, at the end of the day, at the end of the conversation, we're going to have some time for Q&A. And so if questions come up, by all means, feel free to put them in the chat. Just from a little bit of housekeeping. But with that said, Trevor, you obviously just mentioned that you work with mid-size manufacturing firms all over the country. And so just kind of to start this conversation, as you look at the landscape of the companies you're talking to, both small and large, frankly, how ready do you see the industry being for CMMC specifically?
Well, here's what I would say, Craig, is I think people are certainly aware of it. Business owners have tried to do their best to address what the need is, right, which is all being flowed down through, the DoD. And so, there's companies that are at different levels of proficiency with it. Like most entrepreneurially owned businesses, they sort of feel like there's a lot of that they can do themselves. They sort of want to make sure that they have control over their IT infrastructure. And, so that they've been able to kind of press through to different levels. Perhaps it's, upgrading, different hardware, maybe it's, doing work on their servers, right? But at some point, what I would tell you is that they reach this, sort of apex where they recognize that they're either going to, double up the investment to do it themselves and, therefore kind of carry the risk of all the compliance, or they realize that they're really good at doing things like milling precision titanium structures and making components for missiles and aircraft, and not so good at trying to come, on top of what are the ever-changing, requirements for CMMC. And so at that point, that's where we're really seeing people say, hey, is there a solution for me to basically just outsource this to someone who is sort of a specialist? So I think that they're kind of in the medium level in terms of readiness. And then we also know, obviously, the DoD is pushing this to having everyone compliant much more quickly than what I think the supply chain is going to be ready to do. So I think that's the general state of readiness. We haven't run into too many people who've been able to perfect it themselves internally, but we have run into other companies that made the decision early on that this wasn't going to be their expertise, and it was easier to kind of outsource it. And those are like the Chemcos of the world. And I would say that those are more the exception versus the rule. And I think people are reaching the point where they fundamentally have to make that decision. Are they going to continue to go it, internally and support it, or are they going to say, listen, there's a better way to do it that's, it's going to be, cheaper in the long run, it's going to be more efficient, and more importantly, it's going to give somebody else who just focuses on the ever-changing requirements to keep on top of that.
Yeah. Do you, as you're seeing that shift, or maybe there's a time frame when you start to see them go, all right, we're going to either do it all in house, or we're going to start to shift. Do you see that affecting? And we'll get there in a little bit about selling and all that, but does that shift? Is that an overnight thing? Is that taking too long? What's like your view as we're coming in? The DoD is saying they're going to kind of finalize things in March and May. Where do you see that kind of affecting these mid businesses in the hurry up and wait, or the what's kind of the tone that you're talking to businesses or folks that are looking to buy these businesses?
So here's what I would tell you, right? Any good business that's going to scale, that wants to win multi-year awards from their customers, that wants to build 25, 50, 75, $100 million of backlog in the DoD space, which is what everybody wants to do. Every single one of those businesses has recognized now that it's not just about having your accounting and your tax and your insurance and all those other things really on point. They've now realized that kind of IT is actually kind of gone from, like, I'd say number 5 on the list to almost number 1 or number 2, right? Because if you are not in compliance in this area, it could really shut the entire business down. So I think what I would tell you from my perspective is that it's become, top of the list in terms of, board meetings. And then in terms of, customers, it's top of the list, right? So even if you don't sell your business, you just want to continue to grow it. If you want to win those big, hunky multi-year awards, this has become very important. Certainly, if you want to go raise capital, borrow money to kind of grow your business, do capital expenditures, invest and grow, this has now also become an area that some of the lenders are inquiring about. And then certainly if you were ever going to interface with any kind of equity investor, maybe it's a minority investor, maybe it's a control investor or full sale, this is going to be a key area that they diligence. So it is really something that touches all aspects of the business. It's not just something that touches the business per se when you want to maybe go sell the company, right? Doing it early makes that much easier, but it's really in every single DoD contractor, anyone that's in the tier 3 or tier 2 part of the supply chain. It's really something that has moved from kind of that mid-level of the list to the top of the list. And, from my perspective, when I met Rick and learned a little bit about his business, I was really impressed with, how they had focused on this early and kind of what their journey was to kind of get compliant with CMMC. So Rick, I don't know if you want to speak to how you kind of came across this potential challenge and how you really turned it into a strength of your business at Chemco.
Well, I think we were lucky that it sort of happened organically because we were one of Avitara's first customers in 2007 when we purchased our company, and our IT department was in shambles, and so they helped us get over those hurdles for the without making a capital investment and curing all of our problems that were clear in those days, and then as the whole process developed with Avitara over the years, they ended up being in a position to very easily make us CMMC compliant. And we found that it was really critical. If you're not at the top of the food chain in your machine technology and your IT technology, you're just going to be a commodity. And so anyway, with their help, we were able to significantly improve margins by surpassing, what our competitors were doing in all those areas.
And Rick, how important, remind me, did you think it was for your customers to know that you were, capable in this area when they were awarding you, kind of long-term contracts and multi-year awards? Because one of the things that was really attractive about your business is it had secured a lot of work. And, candidly, that's why many people had approached you versus you deciding, you wanted to go and exit the business, right? It was almost the market came to you and sort of I helped organize that for you. But tell us a little bit about where this ranks in terms of, the customer's eyes and also then maybe what your experience was in getting ready to have those conversations with people that approach you on an unsolicited basis.
So, I think that it's less and less important if you're not interested in, larger contracts and important contracts that you can make a margin on. If you're moving up the food chain and you're going after large multi-year 20, 30, 40, $50 million contracts, the customer is now just looking at this much more keenly than they were in the past. I mean, they don't want to take the risk. They don't want to put something that important in the hands of someone who doesn't have all these boxes checked. And if you can show up front that you're there with not only this, but all of the technology in your facility, it just makes them much more at ease. You're able to make more margin, and that made a huge difference for us in making the company more attractive to buyers and to customers. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. One of the things that historically, I just over the last 10 years that I've known you, Rick, is your view of technology as a strategic advantage. So even as the CEO, you had your eye and pulse on IT, but you would self-proclaim you know nothing at the end of the day about the nuts and bolts of how the IT and the technology goes together. But I think a lot of CEOs that I have conversations with, they look at a lot of compliance and even IT as just this administrative line item versus, as a business owner, you've got to take some serious ownership. So I'd love to know your thoughts on that, because I just think you viewed technology a little bit differently than most, even not having a quote unquote technology, background focus.
Well, I knew that it was important, and I also knew that that wasn't our specialty. I mean, that's the whole key, I think, to thinking about this. If you were if you're trying to figure this out on your own, you're just never going to get to the level that Avatara was able to allow us to get to, and it just gave us a competitive advantage.
Trevor, as you guys, I made the comment earlier that obviously CMMC drives overall value of your business, and so you're obviously in the MMA space, and so it's not just I'm continuing to win business. Obviously, that's really, really important. If you don't have those things buttoned up, you won't win some of those contracts. But as you guys are looking at, all right, now we're going to 2023. We've got folks that are looking to acquire or be bought on both sides of the coin. You know, what are you seeing as how this is starting to play out in your space?
Sure. No, great question. So, listen, I've been a dedicated investment banking, person to the aerospace defense industry my entire career. So for the last 25 years, I've done nothing but advise aerospace and defense companies on how to grow, how to access capital, how to think strategically. We've kind of been through, lots of different cycles within the market. And what I would tell you is in the last, 6 years, I think we've sold 40 aerospace and defense companies, Chemco being one of them, right? And, pretty much now our playbook in terms of actually advising a company on how to get ready to engage with outside capital, and let's just leave it at that. It could be equity capital, it could be debt capital, it could be a full sale. We've had to pull basically CMMC and IT compliance all the way up to the front, right? And so a couple of things have kind of occurred, and just their offshoots are really CMMC, right? But, number one, everybody's ultra focused on looking deep into the tier 3 part of the supply chain to ensure that they know the origin of the individual components that are going into defense products, right? That's everything from electronic components, it's raw materials, you name it. The sourcing and being able to figure out the origin of the components is really, really important. That and being able to kind of have the right, flow downs in terms of your contract requirements, really hinge on your IT infrastructure and making sure that you're on point with every single job that you have kind of running through the shop, and, then marrying that with your entire, bid and proposal team. So all these things kind of need to be taken into consideration. And I think when people understand, the level of complexity and can master it, it becomes a real strength for the business. And it really allows them to kind of not only win the backlog, but actually put it in the shop and start to execute. You've got to remember that it's not just, some form filling out and some auditing, right? I mean, this is like a fundamental change in the way that the DoD is saying your business needs to operate from an IT compliance standpoint, right? So this is everything from mobile devices, this is, desktops, this is CNC equipment, this is, you name it, all the way out throughout the shop, and, video cameras and surveillance, right? There's a procedure that's in place for every single one of these things. So when we're working with a company and saying, how are you doing on accounting and tax? Are you compliant, right? Or how are you doing on insurance? What's your backlog really look like? These are the types of things in this area that IT that could actually shut your business down and can really, destroy a lot of value in the company. And then alternatively, done well, they basically put you at the top of the list and, could really unlock a lot of value in the company. I would tell you that if we got into a business and we were working with them and they had really high marks in these areas, and I think Chemco is a great example, we have others, it probably has resulted in them getting another $5 or $10 million of valuation on their company when they went to sell, right? Other businesses that we work with earlier, because we're a very relationship-driven company, we're dedicated to the sectors, we're entrepreneurs, right? We own our own investment banking business too, so we really, connect with private business owners. We could tell you that we would recommend you work on getting these things in place prior to, really exploring any kind of, outside investment or potential sale of the business. At some point in time, like I said, this is going to be something that I think really separates the pack from the true players and the people who are just going to be, living off of the crumbs, because all the large hunky work, sort of like Rick referenced, are going to be going to those companies that, can have a mastery in this area. And, it's really something that pushes, throughout the business, right? So from our perspective, it is really critical that companies kind of take it, as the priority it should be. And, our view on it is they have to really bulk up to do it perfectly internally, or they should consider bringing in an outsourced provider to really turnkey this for them.
Kind of on a caveat off of that, Rick, as you were going through a little bit, maybe even just on the practical of the sell, so to speak, from an IT. So as you were selling the business, how through the process of that sell, what was going on with the IT cybersecurity? What came into play? What were you having to have? Normally when you're doing, accounting audits, you're having, a third party come in and do your audit on accounting. Were you having to do the same kind of things from an IT perspective and a cybersecurity? What was that kind of process around on the sell on the very practical pieces of the IT side?
So luckily, during that process, we had Avatar standing with us. So the seller did do a deep dive. The buyer did do a deep dive on Chemco, but it was really probably one of the easiest parts of our sale because Avatar was standing next to us and we were able to get through all of that process very simply and easily. So it helped in letting the seller know that we were, business really just with Avatar's help. It was hugely beneficial.
And Trevor, from your perspective, you said you sold 40, I think is what you said, maybe more than that. Have you, without obviously naming names, as you're going down that sales process, have you seen things that a company that looked really good on paper get derailed because of IT? I mean, and if so, I'd be interested in just kind of that story, what that process, what got exposed in the midst of what they may have thought would really buttoned up. Not to put you on the spot, but
yeah.
Curious.
No, listen, great question, right? So it never ceases to amaze me after all these years covering the sector that there still are numerous companies in the tier 3 or tier 2 part of the supply chain that are really the critical linchpin of the success of a multi-billion-dollar program, right? I mean, it could be Chemco, it could be a Chemco lookalike, but there are many companies that are still out there where they provide a critical component or a critical kind of sub-assembly for something like that, right? And so, people would be excited about acquiring businesses that have these really niche positions, but that niche position that comes with it may also be sort of a little bit of a spotlight and focus on that, particularly when something goes wrong, right? And when something goes wrong, it's typically a supply chain issue, right? I mean, that's kind of what's faced most people these days. It hasn't been, mistakes or errors. It's really just been the unavailability of raw materials. It's been sort of the delays on getting critical components. And so, everyone is doing a deep dive into the supply chain right now to try to figure out why it isn't working, why it's taking so long. And I think as customers show up at your facility to walk parts and try to, break the log jam on, the production, this is an area that they're starting to kind of look more closely into, right? So, it used to be just, well, what's going on and how do we get a second source or, how do we, speed something up? Now they're actually kind of doing that in conjunction with looking deeper into sort of the IT for a few reasons. Number one, to see if that could have been a root cause of where the problem might have come from. Or number two, those that haven't invested to get ready for CMMC, probably are not going to win the next, multi-year awards. So we're actually seeing that be something that, is super important and a focus. And just back to your original question, can it derail a potential transaction at the end of the day? Yeah, it absolutely can, right? I mean, let's just put it this way: if you get all the way down through the process and you don't sort of pass the dipstick check on IT and CMMC, it could either crater your deal, or it'll certainly kind of potentially reduce the price of the deal, or they might say, the best way to solve it is to put, multi-millions of dollars into an escrow and hold the escrow for a year or two after the sale, just to make sure that there isn't, an event that happens that, would warrant the buyer having to put a bunch of money into the company to be able to try to go cure that. So, that is really sort of the three things that could happen if someone had this great business and kind of got it all the way down to the road and they weren't able to really pass the diligence hurdle for IT.
Yeah. I'll kind of put
and
this.
with Trevor's help, we were able to completely avoid those scenarios.
Yeah. So we're talking a little bit, right, in the last couple of minutes, I'm really focused on, all right, I'm going to sell my business. There's other folks on the phone that are like, hey, I'm not looking, quote unquote, to sell my business. Maybe I'm looking out to just grow organically through winning those contracts, or maybe I am looking to go buy other companies. Rick, you've had a couple of entities within Chemco. One, I think, was through acquisition. Some of that was through organic. Trevor, I know that you're helping other folks buy companies. When people are looking at their IT and technology from the other side of the coin of, all right, I'm going to go buy somebody else's IT, what starts to come into mind of either of you guys? Obviously, IT is important, and they could have a rat's nest that you don't want to deal with, but what are some things that they should either be thinking about to look out for or setting themselves up to go do when they acquire somebody else?
Well, I'll jump on that because I'm going to just put a little bit of, quantitative metric to it, and maybe Rick can do some qualitative, right? If you, have underinvested in this area, someone's going to come in and say, really, let's just, for example, say the EBITDA of the company, and EBITDA is just a proxy for cash flow. That's how businesses are valued. And we'll do simple math because we're all simple people, but let's just say it's a 10 times multiplier of a 5 times EBITDA, right? And so that's $50 million. And so that's the price that they've established for the company. If they say that you've underspent in IT and you have this issue, right? And let's just say that, for example, $100,000 per annum is really what the underspend is. They're going to take that out of your EBITDA and say that that's kind of an ongoing cost. And that $100,000, of course, is going to be a very buyer-friendly number. Maybe they even make that number 200,000 or 300,000 because there's some catch-up that they need to do in order to get compliant. Well, if there's that amount of underspend in your company right now, and someone pro formas that back in, which every buyer would do, to be able to address that, instead of you thinking you saved a couple $100,000 and leaving it for the buyer to fix, you're actually going to get dinged on a multiple effect of what that underspend is. And in my example there, $100,000 to $300,000 per annum at a 10 times multiple could be $1 to $3 million, right? So anything that you might be, kind of putting in your pocket now or leaving for the future has kind of a 10 to 1 multiple effect when you go to sell your business. And so, that's the trade, very quantitatively. And Rick, maybe you could speak to some of the qualitative things around that question.
So I guess qualitatively, I think we would look at it in two ways. Most companies that we encounter have this problem, or that we've looked at in the past, and on a much smaller scale than what you see, Trevor, obviously. But so we either look at the opportunity to really drive down the price that we would pay for the company and be able to buy the company for, or it may in fact scare us away from purchasing the company if it's something that we think is too risky. So I think that's those are the two options as a purchaser of a company that you might find with underspend in this area or inability within your organization. And the other thing is that what we found with Avatara was that we were able to reach, I guess, what we thought at least were the highest levels of what can be done in this department for a very reasonable cost. If we were to do what Avatara was doing for us in-house, it would cost us a multiple of what we spent, and therefore, multiple on the exit as well of that excess cost. So that was very helpful for us.
So I talk to lots of folks in the DoD space, probably 2 to 3 every single day, and there is, over the last couple of years, there's this continual, I'll say, noise of we've got time. Right, the DoD, and Rick, you've been in the space, Trevor, you've been in the space. The DoD is going to move the needle, right? They're going to keep moving. They're going to keep moving. All right, they're talking about March and May, but we still got time. We got time. And one of the things that you said the other day to me, Trevor, specifically was it doesn't really matter what the DoD's decision. The primes that are looking down at who's going to win business and buy business and all
right.
that, they're going to actually dictate more than, frankly, at the end of the day, the DoD. So for folks that are sitting out there going, we've got time, or they're going to move the needle and we'll get there when we need to. Either of you just kind of quick, what would your response be to that person?
I'll say that I think personally that time ran out about 1.5 years ago. We never thought that we had that much. So at least that was our opinion of the situation, just because we leave too much money on the table in every possible direction to take care of these issues. That's good. Today,
I think the reality is, Craig, in my experience, is that certainly Rick makes a great point, but we also know that, DoD and the OEMs and the primes aren't going to shut down production because someone isn't compliant here, right? But what they're going to do, similarly, when any other supplier who's key has issues, is that they continue to work with that supplier and work with them. They want to support them. They've been important to them for a number of years. And while they're doing that, on the other side, they're looking for a different source, right? And so I kind of think when we get to this compliance, date or threshold, there'll be several who won't be. I don't think it's going to bring anything to a screeching halt, but I think it's going to say, okay, who are the long-term players? Who are the ones who aren't going to be long-term players, right? And then, with kind of a ramping defense budget, a big replenishment of a depleted inventory due to some of the, things on the global stage, Russia, Ukraine, there's just a lot of production that's being ramped right now in the DoD space, for, supporting that effort and then kind of replenishing our own inventory. So what I see happening is that, it is really, it's never too late to start. I think where I see the opportunity for someone who might be a late starter or hasn't started at all is to really get proficient quickly. And there's no way you could do that unless you outsource it. And then if you're at least doing that, I think you got a shot at staying in the mix. But I think people who believe that they're critically important and, these deadlines aren't going to really stick, probably won't see an immediate impact in their business this year or perhaps next. But what they probably won't know is that they're getting second sourced, with people who are compliant. And that crossover is going to be brutal, right? So in 2024, 2025, when the crossover really happens, it'll be too late, right? You won't be able to sort of catch up. So I think these deadlines aren't going to, bring the supply chain to a screeching halt. But I do think this is where people are going to raise their hand and say, yes, I'm a long-term player. I'm going to embrace this and really make it a fundamental pillar of my business. And I think people have time to make that decision for the next, 18 to 24 months. I think beyond that, it's going to be pretty clear those that want to have staying power and those that, really won't and will continue to be sort of subscale, businesses.
Yeah. So, my kind of last question, and we'll open up some Q&A. Obviously, this one's a little bit of a selfish question, but you've sold at this point now, Trevor, a handful of our customers, and you've gone through an M&A side of things, and so you have a different view, per se, of Avatara's approach to both IT and the CMMC. And so I would love for you just to kind of share your view as you've worked with, sold 40 other, companies that are out there, and you've seen all kinds of good, bad, ugly, middle of the road IT and technology. But I'd love to know your kind of perspective of the few deals that you've sold, with our platform.
Sure. So fair question, because we've got some expertise there. So I would tell you, let's just kind of frame it out. The average size of a business that we sell is usually somewhere around 75 million US, right? That's kind of what the value of the company is. And you could do some metrics on that with EBITDA multiples and so on and so forth, right? But you're either kind of a 5 million EBITDA business or a 15 million EBITDA business. You're kind of right there, right? And so what I would tell you is that the ones that have had, that have been using Avatar and kind of, embraced your total outsourced turnkey solution, really didn't have any issues whatsoever, ultimately closing the sale of their business. But I think the key thing that we saw compared to others that have used different solutions or candidly try to do it internally is that the number of potential exit partners they have really dwindles as you go through that process. And so, just to give you a perspective, right, if we, design a process and we really, have 10 qualified, buyers who are willing to put in an offer for the company, the companies who have used Avatara have had like 8 out of those 10 want to buy the company at the end of diligence, right? And that competition has resulted in a much higher price for those businesses. Those who have had a different alternative to Avatara or who have done it, frankly, themselves internally, may still have the same 10 people who are interested, but that number kind of goes down to like 3 or 2 at the end, right? So the washout is in the attrition from, people who are really interested is quite high. And those types of buyers are public companies. Those types of buyers are large private equity firms. They manage a couple $100 million to a few billion. Those are international companies, right, who are wanting to come over here and still, acquire in our supply chain for a whole host of reasons. And so that's where we've really kind of seen it. And I can draw a conclusion that lack of competition by being unable to get through the diligence could impact your price. But it's really the competition, set and how people wash out based on, what level of proficiency you had. The Avatar clients have actually used it to a strength and being able to then therefore bring more buyers to the table, better competition, in theory, higher price. And the others have really struggled and have had a high dropout rate once people really take a look under the tent.
Yeah, that's good. And then Rick, I think the last question I just asked before we open it up to Q&A, you are a very shrewd businessman. And so, I just feel like every year we have the conversation of, all right, is Avatar the right platform? And is it meeting ultimately your IT needs? Is it meeting your productivity needs? And is it hitting the cost factor side of things? And so just as a client of ours for, whatever it was, 15 years, you reevaluate it every year, but you were there for the long haul, right? And that's not common, I think, in a lot of IT, especially in kind of this full outsourcing models. And so as you did that every year, obviously you like the model, but is there anything you would add to that and you being on the hindsight of selling your business?
So we struggled over the years to find really anyone to even compare you to, frankly. We were always happy with the service. We grew with you from the beginning, and we could never figure out how to even do what you were doing for us for even double or triple the cost. And so we searched and searched for competitors of yours and weren't able to really find any that really gave us the comfort, in our business and the end of the business that you were complying with, ITAR, with all of the things that were important to us over the years. So it just wasn't our core competency. We didn't want it to be part of our core competency. We wanted to make parts, and we just couldn't ever really find anyone who could do everything you did. And so that's, what made us stay with you as long as we did.
That's good. That's good.
And
by the way,
Greg, like you mentioned earlier, there's
our company. Pardon me? Oh,
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Rick.
Oh, I was going to say, by the way, the purchasers of our company over a year and a half ago have continued on with you, and they have actually looked at expanding your services into their other portfolio companies. So that has that's sort of the proof in the pudding, I think.
Yeah.
Sorry.
What were you going to say, Trevor?
No, fair point. And I was just to add onto the back of that, I think, there's a reason why, Craig, you have so many DoD clients, right? You said you had, north of 40 or 50. And again, from my perspective, we work a lot of IT providers and, deal with this in our client base, which is throughout the United States and through Canada. And so we've not found an IT provider that's had the portfolio of DoD direct clients, right? There's been some that have had some here or there. It tends to be a little bit more geographic versus, kind of nationwide. And as far as I can tell, I'm not aware of anybody else, other than Avatar that has that focus on kind of a nationwide basis, on DoD, which I think makes you unique. And, with that size and scale now, you've kind of seen just about every supplier in the tier 2 or tier 3 part of the supply chain, which, makes it just easier for you to assess a company, make a recommendation on what they need, and then to be able to execute and, implement the solution.
Yeah, that's good. So with that, hopefully this conversation has been enlightening, educational, insightful. But what I do want to do right now is open it up to any questions. And so if you have any questions at all, feel free to throw them in the chat or the question box, so to speak, and we'll see them and I can kind of vet those out. But as those are coming in, just for those that are listening, if you are in a place where you are, hey, I'm looking to get acquired or sell or whatever the case might be, you can reach out to William Connolly. He's the business development folks over on the Cal Capital side. And then if you been intrigued about, hey, what is this Avatara? We are not going to get into a sales pitch of what Avatara is, but if you would like to know more about what we do, how we do it, by all means, feel free to reach out to us. My contact information is there as well. But anybody have any questions that they'd like to kind of pose to Rick or to Trevor? Trevor, one of the questions that's come in is this might be a loaded question, but if you were looking at one aspect of the IT that you think people are having the most difficult time getting their arms around, is there anything that you've in the last handful of years seeing that this is the thing that gets difficult for folks?
Yeah, I think it's really kind of the integration of all the machinery and equipment on the floor and kind of the Internet of Things. That's really the biggest risk, right? You've got now everybody inside the facility, everybody with a smartphone, everybody with a Wi-Fi or some other connection. You've got every piece of equipment that has more data being captured and then kind of used to kind of analyze the business. And so really it's that connection between with what's happening on the floor and everything being so complex with the number of people on the floor, each having their own device with, high definition recording and, high speed. That to me has been where people have had kind of the most questions. I've seen it everything where people have bought solutions that basically knock out cell phones throughout the entire floor. Everybody kind of has a policy, right? But policies sometimes don't always get followed. You see people with like the earbuds in kind of walking around. But that's where I think it's been the most difficult for our clients and relationships to really get their arms around that component of it. Because you can tell there's a lot happening when you start to envision what a 100,000 square foot facility looks like with all that type of activity going on, running, it could be running 2 shifts, 6 days a week. There's a lot of things going in and out there.
Yeah, that's good. So this question that just came in, I'll take part of it, and then Rick, I think another part of it will be good for you. So it says, how is Avatara handling the CMMC audit process, and will that include a standardized C3PAO assessment, and how will this affect ongoing value of the platform? So there's a couple ways to answer that. So Avatara is, without getting into the platform, we have a tech side, and then we have some policy components that we're doing. Avatara has been working with a C3PAO that we would highly recommend our clients use. For those that aren't aware, if you go to any pre-assessments, the person who does your pre-assessment can't do your audit. And so our recommendation is that our clients would use our C3PAO. And then there's another company called Lupa Advisors for anybody that's wanting to do kind of a pre-assessment where they work hand in hand with Avatara. They've been doing this with a couple of our customers, and Kimco is one of them, where we've got all of our documentation and tech side stuff done. We've done pre-assessments as Avatara, but they kind of come and start to look at the nitty-gritty of physical security and all those types of things. And so I would just say we've got some unique relationships because of our economies of scale, that we've got a company called Lupa Advisors that we work with that does kind of a pre-assessment. And then we have some folks that can come behind and do the C3PAO, and we all know each other. And so there's some nice economies of scale. So Rick, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more to that, the Lupa side of, what they're doing kind of pre-assessment wise for, getting Kimco and other companies ready.
I think that's maybe a little bit better to talk about at another time directly with people who have questions about it. Any
other questions before we let you guys get on with your Friday afternoon? All right. Well, I'll give everybody one more minute before we kind of wrap things up. This last kind of bit of housekeeping. This call has been recorded. We will send that out to everybody as well. And Trevor and Rick, really, really appreciate the conversation, the candidness, the openness. And if you guys have got any questions at all about anything we've talked about, feel free to reach out to myself or to Will on the Cal Capital side of things. One just kind of comment coming in for both Trevor and Rick, just saying thanks for your time doing this and very illuminating. So
terrific. Well, I really appreciate it, Craig. Rick, it's always good to get back together with you on anything. And I'll just leave you with Aviation Week has their big conference of the year in Beverly Hills next week. And so I'll be at the conference with my full Cal Capital team, and I'll be speaking on some of these topics again on February 1st on the M&A supply chain panel. So if any of you happen to be out that way or are going to be attending, I would love to meet you at the conference. And if not, certainly, happy to meet you at any point in the future. Just contact Will or me, and really look forward to being helpful to the supply chain. It's important to me, and I want to see the supply chain continue to mature and be the best in the world. So I'm happy to take the time and have those conversations with anybody that's interested.
Absolutely. The one last question just kind of came at the buzzer, if you will, and Trevor, you can feel free to answer. We can answer it offline, but it was just, you kind of hit it earlier, but what's the average percentage of value lost when you go to market with an inadequate IT? You kind of walked through an example, but so I don't know if there's just a kind of a quick high level there, but.
Yeah, sure. So here's kind of what I would tell you, right? I find that people are spending a few $100,000 a year on this. And so I think my example really kind of holds. And here's what I would tell you. If you don't have it, it's going to be a minimum of a multiplier of the value of your business as a deduct, right? And so that example I give you, 1 to 3 million. That in itself could then lead to other areas of scrutiny and diligence, which then might bring the overall multiple down. So I would tell you at a simplistic level, it's millions of dollars, right? Single millions of dollars. I could tell you at a more nuanced level, it could be $5 or $10 million, right? It really is that significant. It's just not the cost that hits the P&L. It's just the overall perception of how mature the business is. And so, from our standpoint, look, I'd like to sell businesses for the highest possible price. And, it kills us to have people get knocked down or have money put in escrow at a multiple effect. And so if I could do anything, it would be to encourage people to spend the money now and don't have someone, kind of ding you on a multiple effect later.
That's good. Excellent. Well, we'll end there. Rick, Trevor, thanks again for your time. You guys have a great weekend. Everybody else, thank you so much.
Thank you, Craig.
Bye-bye, guys.
Thanks, Craig.
Take care. Bye-bye now.
Thanks. Bye.